The deep dive is where we bypass the complexity and get straight to the essential, actionable knowledge shaping our world. Today, we're undertaking a crucial mission to shortcut the analysis of a truly seismic cultural phenomenon, the crisis of mental health, and free inquiry on college campuses.
And we're doing that by digging into a foundational book, The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt.
Right. And our deep dive is really focused on a central, perplexing question. Why, starting in the early 2010s, did we see this unprecedented and, frankly, rapid convergence of three really negative trends?
You have a dramatic decline in student mental health, that's one,
Then severe institutional pressure on academic freedom.
and a marked escalation of incivility and, moral conflict. The authors argue these aren't just isolated campus stories. They're systemic symptoms of a fundamental shift in how a whole generation perceives self, feelings, and conflict.
And what makes their analysis so valuable, especially for you, the listener, is the sheer intellectual breadth of their framework. They didn't just look at campus policy.
No, not at all. They synthesized ancient philosophy, modern psychology, and contemporary sociological data to really pinpoint the drivers.
And they suggest that this cultural shift, particularly within what they call the iGen generation, so those born roughly from 1995 onward, is being powered by the widespread, often unintentional acceptance of three core, yet profoundly harmful ideas.
They label them the Great Untruths.
And that term, Great Untruth, it's meant to convey a really serious consequence.
It is. For an idea to earn this title, it had to meet three pretty strict criteria. First, it has to directly contradict the accumulated wisdom of ages, ideas that have survived across diverse cultures for millennia.
Like the famous aphorism from Nietzsche, right?
Mhm.
What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That's the classic ancient wisdom they're saying this stands against.
Precisely. The second criterion is just as critical. The idea has to contradict modern, evidence-based psychological research on human well-being. And here, they leaned heavily on the findings of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Which we'll definitely get into later.
We will. And the final point, the one that gives it this moral gravity, is that the idea has to actively harm the individuals and communities who embrace it. It's not just wrong, it's psychologically and socially destructive.
So, to set the scene, the authors use this wonderful image, the Oracle of Koalemos, the Greek god of stupidity.
Right. Picture this oracle sitting not on a marble tripod, but in, a Barca lounger, just delivering the toxic wisdom of our current cultural moment.
And the delivery is wonderfully provocative. The first core message from this oracle is the untruth of fragility. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker.
The second is the untruth of emotional reasoning. Always trust your feelings.
And the third, and this is the one that generates so much social friction, is the untruth of us versus them. Life is a battle between good people and evil people.
So our mission today is to explore the journey of these ideas, how they went from abstract bad habits to concrete, internalized beliefs that have changed policy and behavior, especially in higher education.
Okay, let's unpack that first and maybe most counterintuitive. Untruth. The idea that challenges weaken us. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker.
I mean, when you look across history, it just seems fundamentally absurd.
It does. Ancient traditions consistently taught that facing hardship, failure, insult, that was a necessary prerequisite for forging strength.
That's because the ancients understood the concept of stressors. Look beyond Nietzsche. The sources cite Mencius, the Chinese philosopher from the 4th century BCE.
Oh, right.
Mencius explicitly argued that when the universe is preparing a person for a great responsibility, it has to first subject their body to hard work, their belly to hunger, and place these profound obstacles in their way.
And why? What was the purpose of that?
So as to stimulate the mind, harden the nature, and improve wherever they are incompetent. Hardship is the tool of development. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
So the danger of teaching fragility is that you're essentially inoculating people against strength. If you genuinely believe that failures or minor conflicts or upsetting information will cause lasting psychological damage, will break you.
Then you'll avoid them. Of course you will. You'll avoid the very stressors that human beings are fundamentally programmed to need for adaptation.
It's a physiological truth applied to the mind, isn't it?
Absolutely. If you put a body in zero gravity, the bones and muscles atrophy rapidly. Why? Because they lack the necessary load-bearing stress.
There's no challenge.
Right. And similarly, if you perpetually insulate a young mind from the friction of disagreement or the pain of rejection or the reality of failure, you create a mind that is rigid, brittle, and incapable of efficiently processing the inevitable shocks of adult life.
To articulate this dynamic more clearly, the authors borrow a concept from Nassim Nicholas Taleb, which is essential for understanding the psychological solution: anti-fragility.
Yes, and we need to spend a moment defining this because most people mix it up with other terms.
Like resilience
Uh,
or robustness.
exactly. It's vital not to confuse it. So most people understand robustness, something that can withstand shocks without changing. Think of a reinforced concrete bunker. It shrugs off a bombing, but it doesn't get better.
It just survives.
It survives. Then there's resilience, something that can withstand shocks and return to its original state. Think of a plastic water bottle. You can dent it, but it bounces back.
But anti-fragility is something else entirely.
It's a different category. Anti-fragility describes a system, and this applies to human beings, our immune systems, our financial markets, our minds, that is actually strengthened and improved by exposure to manageable adversity, disorder, manageable risks, and small doses of pain.
So it benefits from the hit.
It benefits from disorder. That's the definition.
That reframes the entire purpose of education and parenting, doesn't it? The tragedy they identify is that our modern societal structure, driven by these neurotically overprotective policies and anxious parenting,
It ends up being an active agent of harm. By trying so hard to insulate individuals from necessary stressors, they turn the individual mind into a brittle system.
and that takes us directly to the cultural manifestation of this untruth: the rise of safetyism. This concept is central to understanding the crisis.
It is. Originally, safety, especially throughout the 20th century, was a huge triumph of modernization. We achieved unprecedented levels of physical safety things like reduced child mortality, seatbelts, building codes.
We won the war on physical danger, arguably.
We did. But then the definition of safety began to expand dramatically. It shifted from physical well-being to emotional comfort.
And that is the pivotal move that changed everything on campus.
Everything. Because once emotional comfort becomes the highest institutional priority, everything else, including free inquiry, rational debate, the pursuit of truth, it all has to be subordinated to it.
This sounds like the mechanism of what the authors call concept creep, where the meaning of a concept expands, often into the subjective realm.
That's precisely what happened to terms like trauma, bullying, or abuse. Historically, there were more objective criteria for assessing these harms. But in the safetyist culture, the standard shifts to a subjective standard.
The feeling of the recipient takes precedence.
Exactly. If a person reports that an event felt traumatic, or if a statement felt like violence, that subjective assessment is given precedence by the institution.
I see the immediate problem there. If my feelings alone define the reality of the harm, then there's no room for questioning or context or proportionality.
The institution is essentially endorsing emotional reasoning before we even get to the second untruth.
And the most vivid practical outcome of enforcing this subjective standard is what they call the peanut allergy mistake analogy. It's a powerful metaphor.
It's a great one for the backfiring effect of overprotection.
Walk us through that analogy in detail. Why is trying to create a perfectly safe environment for ideas ultimately so detrimental?
Okay, so the analogy uses the rise of peanut allergies. When schools aggressively banned all peanuts to protect sensitive children, they did achieve protection, but there was an inadvertent side effect. By eliminating all exposure to the protein, they prevented other children's immune systems from being introduced to it in small, manageable doses.
So the immune system, lacking this necessary stressor, never learned that the peanut protein was harmless.
Right, it never got the data. So when those children inevitably encountered peanuts outside the school bubble, their body reacted violently, viewing the protein as a mortal threat, leading to an actual allergy.
The analogy for the mind is direct then.
It is. If we continually shield young people from ideas that might offend them or opinions they find upsetting, we are preventing their psychological immune systems, their coping mechanisms, their cognitive tools from learning that these things are manageable, often harmless, and certainly not lethal.
So when they inevitably encounter these ideas outside the institution, they react with extreme anxiety and moral panic. They see mere words as violence.
And the protective measure becomes the primary cause of the very fragility and anxiety it's sought to eliminate. It backfires completely.
So the untruth of fragility is this destructive mindset reinforced by the culture of safetyism. But mindsets don't just materialize out of nowhere.
No, they have roots.
We need to shift now and explore the societal mechanisms, the three critical threads that allowed this culture to take root so rapidly, particularly affecting the iGen generation.
The ones who started hitting college campuses around 2013?
Exactly. And we have to start with how this generation was raised.
The first crucial thread is the combination of paranoid parenting and the resulting decline of free play. And the seeds of this shift were sown decades ago, built on a myth.
Which myth is that?
The grotesquely inflated fear of stranger danger, amplified by media coverage starting in the 1980s.
I remember the milk cartons in the 80s, the images of missing children, the John Walsh, America's Most Wanted phenomenon. It fueled a real national panic.
It did, and the authors point out this critical disconnect. While these media images fostered a pervasive sense of imminent danger, the actual statistics tell a radically different story. Stranger abduction, the type of crime that fuels this fear, is incredibly rare.
How rare are we talking?
Statistically, about 100 cases per year in a nation of tens of millions of children. Yet this fear drove profound, often lasting behavioral changes in parents.
And this fear translated into what sociologists call concerted cultivation, especially among middle and upper-class families.
Yes. Concerted cultivation is highly structured, adult-managed, intentional parenting aimed at maximizing a child's skills and competitive advantage. Paranoid parenting is the emotional engine of this.
So it teaches children a damaging meta lesson.
A very damaging one. That the world is inherently dangerous, that they cannot manage risk, and that they need constant adult supervision to survive. Even simple acts like walking to a friend's house or playing alone in the yard are viewed as unacceptable liabilities.
And the cost of this overprotection is the decline of what used to be the natural social training ground for children. Unstructured, unsupervised free play.
That decline has been steep since the 1970s. Kids used to negotiate rules, resolve conflicts, and learn to manage minor emotional hurts entirely on their own, whether in the park or the street. This unsupervised environment was their social gymnasium.
And now that time is replaced by adult-run, organized activities, often driven by the hyper-competitive resume arms race for college admission.
Exactly. So if a conflict arises during a supervised soccer practice, the adult referee or coach steps in immediately. The child loses the opportunity to learn conflict resolution skills, negotiation, and the necessary experience of managing social friction without a higher authority intervening.
You're reinforced in the belief that challenges are dangers, and that only external authority figures can ensure your safety.
It deprives the child of agency and competence, leading them to be less resilient when they arrive in an environment like a college campus that is supposed to encourage intellectual risk-taking. They enter college already primed for fragility.
That structural setup dovetails perfectly with the second major thread, the iGen mental health crisis. This generation wasn't just raised differently. They entered adolescence facing a new, massive psychological stressor that coincided almost perfectly with their arrival on campus.
The data here is, it's alarming and undeniable. Starting around 2011, there has been a sharp, dramatic, and unprecedented rise in serious adolescent mental health issues, specifically anxiety, depression, and self-harm rates, especially pronounced among girls.
And this spike began after 2011.
Right, meaning this group arrived on campus right around 2013, ready to demand the very safetyism the administrators were prepared to provide.
So what happened around 2011? The timeline is critical here.
That's the year that ownership of the smartphone, specifically the iPhone, crossed the 50% threshold for teenagers. The rise of digital life and social media usage became near universal.
And the shift from in-person, unstructured social time to mediated digital social time was cemented.
And this digital environment is a psychological minefield. Social media amplifies certain cognitive distortions. It creates a perpetual performance culture where every interaction is curated and judged. It exposes teens to constant relational aggression, cyberbullying that follows them home and never stops.
And it feeds the fear of missing out, or FOMO.
Constantly. By sending signals that other people are having more fun or achieving more success, these are all major drivers of anxiety and depression.
So it sounds like they are coming to campus already exhausted and anxious.
Very much so, which means they are highly susceptible to the appeal of safetyism. If you are already struggling with diagnosed mood disorders, the promise of an institution that will insulate you from anything emotionally challenging, it sounds like a lifeline.
And this brings us to the third thread, the bureaucracy of safetyism itself. The college administration.
Yes. We often hear about the massive growth in non-faculty administrative staff over the last few decades, and the statistics are striking.
How striking.
Since 1975, the number of administrators has grown far faster than the number of faculty members or students. And this expanding bureaucracy is often incentivized differently than the teaching staff.
How so?
While professors are theoretically motivated by the pursuit of truth and intellectual rigor, administrators are often motivated by compliance and risk management. The priority shifts from intellectual challenge to limiting legal liability.
And that drives institutional modeling of distorted thinking.
Exactly. When the central mission is liability reduction, the unwritten rule becomes overreacting is better than underreacting, and overregulating is better than underregulating, because the cost of an emotional complaint becoming a lawsuit is just so much higher than the cost of simply censoring an offensive speaker.
So the culture promotes extreme caution over intellectual courage.
And this is where we see concept creep translating directly into policy, like the expansive redefinition of Title IX harassment policies.
Explain that.
Well, Title IX requires institutions to address hostile educational environments. But the bureaucratic response was often to expand the definition of harassment so broadly that it included virtually any single offensive utterance, even if it was unintentional.
This institutionalizes the subjective safety standard.
It does. If a student says they feel harassed by an idea or a word, the institution is pressured to validate that feeling to mitigate legal risk. We see that example cited in the sources. The janitor who was sanctioned for reading a book celebrating the defeat of the Ku Klux Klan.
Because of the cover.
Because of the cover. The book cover, featuring an image related to Klan violence, was seen by another student who found it upsetting. The college, in its liability-driven mindset, sanctioned the reader. They didn't evaluate the content, the book was anti-Klan, they evaluated the impact.
The feeling of discomfort it caused.
Right, and that institutional prioritizing of emotional comfort above all else trivializes true harassment and fundamentally undermines the mission of free inquiry.
That institutional environment, which validates subjective feelings as fact, leads us directly to the second great untruth, the untruth of emotional reasoning. The idea that you should always trust your feelings.
And this is deeply entrenched in modern pop culture. It celebrates authenticity and self-expression above critical evaluation.
But it's the ultimate collision between ancient wisdom and contemporary psychology.
It really is. Every major wisdom tradition, whether it's Stoicism in the West or Buddhism in the East, teaches that your immediate emotional response is often unreliable, misleading, and the source of your suffering.
Can you give us some of those ancient examples? It helps to ground the discussion in that historical context.
Of course. Take the Stoics. Epictetus, writing from Rome, said, "What troubles men are not things themselves, but their judgments about things." He was arguing that if you step on a rake and it hurts, that's a thing. But the judgment, my whole day is ruined, this is a catastrophe, the universe hates me, that is the source of the lasting psychological pain.
So the feeling is based on an interpretation, not reality.
Exactly. Or think of Boethius, writing The Consolation of Philosophy while awaiting execution in a jail cell. He concluded, "Nothing is miserable unless you think it so." He was saying that external circumstances are irrelevant. Your reaction, your interpretation is everything.
The core insight is consistent then. Feelings are powerful, but they're not necessarily true.
They are tremendously powerful, but they are instantaneous, automatic, and frequently distort reality, especially in high-stakes social situations. Maturity, mental health, wisdom, they all require learning the difficult skill of pausing, identifying, and questioning those immediate feelings.
Which brings us to the antidote to emotional reasoning, the clinical practice that confirms this ancient wisdom. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
CBT, pioneered by Aaron Beck in the 1960s, is the gold standard evidence-based therapy for treating anxiety and depression. Its central premise is simple. Our thoughts influence our emotions, and our emotions influence our behavior.
So if you can change the thoughts, you can change the whole cycle.
If you can train yourself to identify and challenge dysfunctional automatic thoughts, what we call cognitive distortions, you can interrupt the negative cycle.
The authors use that fantastic metaphor from the happiness hypothesis to explain how the mind works in this process. The mind as a rider and an elephant.
That's Jonathan Haidt's signature framework. The mind is a small conscious rider. That's your controlled processes, reasoning, lodging atop a massive, powerful elephant. Your automatic processes, emotions, and intuition.
And the elephant is much stronger.
Much stronger. But the rider is the one with the map and the ability to course correct. CBT is the training system that teaches the rider how to talk back effectively to the powerful elephant, changing interpretations, which then redirects the emotions and behavior.
And the disturbing realization that Lukianoff had, drawing on his own history with anxiety and therapy, was that The rhetoric and behavioral patterns he was seeing on college campuses were almost a textbook guide to the exact cognitive distortions CBT is designed to eliminate.
Precisely. We don't need to run through all 9 distortions, but let's focus on the ones that are most rampant in this toxic campus culture.
Let's start with emotional reasoning itself.
Right. Emotional reasoning. This is letting feelings dictate reality. The campus application is clear. I feel unsafe in this lecture hall because of the speaker's ideas. Therefore, the speaker is dangerous and must be silenced.
The feeling is taken as proof.
The feeling of offense or anxiety is taken as proof of malicious intent or actual danger. Then there's catastrophizing, which seems to be endemic in highly politicized environments.
That's a good example of that.
Catastrophizing is focusing on the worst possible outcome and believing it's the most likely. For example, a minor disagreement or an off-color joke is immediately interpreted as proof that a person is a racist or a fascist, and that their presence means the entire educational system is fundamentally corrupt and about to collapse.
There's no middle ground. Every threat is existential.
None, which naturally leads to dichotomous thinking and labeling.
Black and white thinking.
Exactly. Dichotomous thinking sees everything in extremes. People are either purely good or purely evil, innocent or guilty, heroes or oppressors. And once that categorization is made, labeling takes over.
You don't argue against the idea, you just label the person.
Right. You are a bigot or you are a fascist. This immediately shuts down dialogue and justifies moral exclusion because you're dealing with an irredeemable enemy, not a complex person you disagree with.
And what's disturbing is that these bad mental habits are often inadvertently encouraged by institutional tools meant to promote inclusivity. This brings us to the critique of the concept of microaggressions.
Right. The concept of microaggressions was developed to address real phenomena, the cumulative psychological harm caused by brief, daily verbal or behavioral indignities that communicate hostility, often toward marginalized groups. The intent in the concept is to raise awareness of subtle forms of bias.
But the authors argue that the widespread application of microaggression training on campus often ends up encouraging the very cognitive distortions CBT aims to correct. How do you square that circle?
That's where the analysis gets sharp. While the concept points to real harms, the training often teaches students to interpret ambiguous statements, like asking an Asian American student, "Where are you really from?" in the most negative possible way.
Which is textbook negative filtering and emotional reasoning.
It is. Instead of assuming confusion or just clumsy curiosity, the student is taught to assume malicious intent.
But wait, if someone truly is harmed by that statement, shouldn't their feelings be acknowledged? Isn't the point that these small insults add up over time?
That is the genuine complexity, and it's why the authors stress that the intent of the concept might be good, but the institutional outcome is destructive. By validating the most negative interpretation, the institution is essentially training students to engage in a negative self-fulfilling prophecy.
So they are encouraged to embrace the flash of offense and label themselves a victim, rather than training the mind to assume goodwill, or seek clarification, or just shrug off a clumsy remark.
And this accelerates the dangerous shift in moral judgment. The focus moves entirely from the speaker's intent, what the person meant, to the listener's impact, how the listener felt.
And if impact overrides intent, dialogue becomes impossible.
Utterly impossible. If I offend you, even accidentally, I am immediately categorized as an aggressor. My apology or explanation of intent is irrelevant because your subjective feeling has already declared me guilty.
This reinforces fragility and creates an environment where any offensive idea can be redefined as violence.
And once offensive ideas are redefined as violence, then censorship becomes necessary, not ideological. That's how we get the wave of speaker disinvitation attempts that fire the foundation for individual rights and expression has tracked.
And nearly half of those attempts were successful.
Because the institution yields to the subjective safety standard.
That subjective sense of danger, combined with the distorted thinking we just outlined, perfectly feeds into the third and most socially volatile untruth. The untruth of us versus them, the idea that life is a battle between good people and evil people.
And this untruth exploits the deepest, most ancient wiring of the human brain, tribalism. Our minds are evolutionarily designed for in-group loyalty and out-group hostility.
Morality is a double-edged sword.
It is. It binds groups together by defining a shared narrative, but it simultaneously blinds individuals to arguments, nuance, or information that challenges the group's collective identity or sense of righteousness.
It's the activation of the tribe switch. Once it's flipped, Individual critical thinking is subordinated to group cohesion.
And this is made so much worse by contemporary political dynamics. We've seen the drastic rise of what's called affective polarization, the increasing hostility and negative emotional attachment directed toward the opposing political party or ideological group.
So people are motivated less by love for their own party's platform and more by hatred or fear of the outgroup?
Exactly. This environment is highly combustible and perfect for exploiting the US versus them narrative.
So how does this tribalism manifest in the specific context of campus activism?
It manifests through what the authors call common enemy identity politics. This approach focuses on defining groups primarily by intersecting dimensions of power, privilege, and oppression, which often leads to the categorization of ideological opponents as irredeemably evil, structural oppressors.
They aren't merely wrong, they are threats to be eliminated.
Right, and this is in stark contrast to what the authors call common humanity identity politics.
Like Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes. Think of figures like MLK or Pauli Murray. Their brand of activism appealed to shared moral frameworks, national ideals, and a sense of universal human dignity. They sought to bridge the gap and humanize the opponent, urging integration based on love and shared values.
Whereas common enemy identity politics appeals to resentment, moral superiority, and the necessity of struggle against an entrenched, malicious enemy.
It does. And while a concept like intersectionality is a powerful tool for analyzing complexity in practice on campus, it can often be reduced to seeing ubiquitous bipolar dimensions of privilege versus oppression.
Which leads to a hierarchy of victimhood.
And to identifying a specific, often very visible group like straight white males as the primary intersectional address of structural evil. This provides the common enemy necessary to activate the tribe.
And when you combine that common enemy framework with the subjective standard of offense and the use of social media, you get the emergence of call-out culture.
Call-out culture is the mechanism of enforcement. It's where individuals gain social status not by building something, but by identifying small offenses, performing moral righteousness, and publicly shaming the offenders on social media.
Social media provides the megaphone.
And the audience necessary for moral panics to spread at warp speed. And the psychological cost of this culture is profound, especially for those inside the institution.
It's devastating.
Students and faculty report constantly walking on eggshells, gripped by this paralyzing fear of saying the wrong word, committing an accidental microaggression, or defending someone who has been targeted.
This constant vigilance and self-censorship destroy the necessary intellectual environment.
Critical thinking requires the freedom to think, speak, and fail out loud. When internal disagreement is treated as moral treason, you get groupthink, dogmatism, and a rapid narrowing of acceptable political thought.
We need to look at specific examples where these three untruths, fragility, emotional reasoning, and us versus them combine to create maximum social chaos. The authors categorize these as Durkheimian witch hunts.
That term is heavy, so let's clarify it. Emil Durkheim, the sociologist, argued that periods of collective moral effervescence high-energy gatherings often result in society defining and punishing transgressors to affirm its moral boundaries and enhance group solidarity.
So these campus conflicts, fueled by social media, become rapid collective eruptions of moralistic violence aimed at purging the perceived moral pollutants.
Yes, and the emails of 2015 serve as a real inflection point. Let's look at Claremont McKenna College first.
Okay, what happened at CMC?
At CMC, Dean Mary Spellman sent an email to a student group discussing how difficult it was for marginalized students to feel like they fit in. She concluded by saying she hoped they could find a place where they did fit and not feel like they don't belong at CMC. The phrase she used was that she was working to serve students who don't feel they fit the mold.
And the word mold was seized upon.
It was seized upon and interpreted through the lens of emotional reasoning and us versus them. Students interpreted her intent as hostile, suggesting she was forcing diverse students into a white institutional mold.
Despite her apologies.
Despite her repeated, tearful apologies and claims that her intent was supportive, protests erupted, including a hunger strike, until she was forced to resign. The goal was retribution and signaling moral purity, not reconciliation or dialogue.
And simultaneously at Yale, we had the Halloween costume controversy involving Erica Christakis.
Erica Christakis, a lecturer, sent an email questioning a broader administrative directive that advised students against wearing culturally insensitive Halloween costumes. Her email was a nuanced, philosophical invitation to reflection.
What did she say?
She argued that the growing tendency to cultivate vulnerability in students carries unacknowledged costs. She asked, shouldn't students learn to look away if offended or speak up themselves?
This invitation to discuss cultural boundaries was immediately recategorized as an aggressive attack on students' safety and dignity.
Absolutely. The Untruth of Emotional Reasoning declared, "I feel harmed, therefore your inquiry is violence." Students cornered her husband, Nicholas Christakis, shouting and demanding her resignation. The outrage was completely disproportionate to the act.
But the most extreme manifestation of this witch hunt mentality was arguably the Evergreen State College meltdown in 2017.
Oh, Evergreen provides the perfect illustration of how rapidly dichotomous thinking and labeling can destroy an institution. Evergreen was highly progressive, committed to social justice.
So you wouldn't expect this there.
Right. But for decades, the college had held an annual day of absence where people of color voluntarily left campus to highlight their importance. But in 2017, the policy changed.
How did it change?
It changed from voluntary absence to a mandatory day of exclusion where white people were told to leave the campus. Professor Brett Weinstein objected in an email.
And what was his objection?
He argued that a voluntary protest was a legitimate exercise of free speech, but mandatory exclusion based on race constituted an act of bad faith and a profound reversal of anti-racist principles.
And his good faith objection was instantly labeled as an act of white supremacy.
In the US versus them binary, there's no room for internal disagreement. If you question a policy deemed necessary for justice, you are automatically positioned as the enemy. The subsequent chaos involves students cornering him, shouting obscenities, occupying buildings, and demanding the resignation of anyone who spoke in his defense.
The entire event was ruled by emotional fervor, not reason.
The sources describe how the mob identified opponents, including the college president and even the campus police chief, as symbols of the common enemy. The police chief was accused of being a white supremacist and told to attend meetings unarmed.
They really believed they were fighting an immediate existential threat.
They did, and that justified all means necessary, including controlling exits and physically intimidating faculty. This episode demonstrated the logical and institutional endpoint of combining the three great untruths: the complete destruction of academic governance.
The intensity of these conflicts brings us back to the most fundamental philosophical question. What is the purpose, the telos, of a university? Many of the oldest universities, like Harvard, proclaim veritas truth as their guiding star.
And if the university chooses emotional comfort or legal liability mitigation or social engineering over the pursuit of truth, is it still serving its core purpose?
Lukianoff and Haidt argue that liberal education itself hinges on the university's ability to recommit to truth-seeking.
Recognizing that this pursuit requires intellectual discomfort, disagreement, and the exposure to offensive ideas. The survival of the university depends on rejecting fragility and embracing the anti-fragile educational model.
Which means institutions need to adopt the perspective articulated by the activist Van Jones. His, quote, perfectly captures the necessity of adversity.
It's such a powerful analogy. He said, I don't want you to be safe ideologically. I don't want you to be safe emotionally. I want you to be strong. That's different. I'm not going to pave the jungle for you. Put on some boots and learn how to deal with adversity. I'm not going to take all the weights out of the gym. That's the whole point of the gym. This is the gym.
That is the anti-fragile contract.
Yeah.
Preparing the child for the road, not the road for the child.
Exactly.
So we know the problem, we know the drivers. What are the concrete, evidence-based strategies proposed in the sources to actively resist these three great untruths and build the necessary strength?
We have to attack each untruth with its corresponding antidote. First, to resist the untruth of fragility, we must reverse the decline of free play and autonomy.
Which means parents and institutions must deliberately encourage autonomy, unstructured activities, and the management of small, manageable risks.
Right. And you combat the fear with facts and structure. Organizations like Let Grow, which was co-founded by Haidt, promote this by encouraging unsupervised childhood activities. You have to repeatedly point out the statistical reality. Crime rates against children are actually down to levels not seen since the 1960s.
The danger is not external. The danger is the self-inflicted psychological harm caused by overprotection.
We have to teach children that their minds are anti-fragile systems that benefit from stress.
Second, to resist the untruth of emotional reasoning, the antidote must be institutionalized. And that's cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes. This goes beyond just personal therapy. It means teaching students these skills as part of the curriculum. We need to explicitly teach them the vocabulary of cognitive distortions and provide tools to recognize and rebut their automatic thoughts.
And the evidence is overwhelming that CBT works.
It works, often as well as medication, for anxiety and depression by training the mind to be less reactive and more realistic.
What are some of those practical day-to-day CBT techniques people can use immediately when they feel that powerful emotional rush?
One of the most effective is called externalizing the thought. When an anxious thought hits, say, I just misspoke in class, everyone thinks I'm an idiot and I'm going to fail. You don't treat it as a decree from on high.
You observe it.
You turn it into an observation. I am having the thought that I am an idiot. By identifying it as a mental event, you create critical distance. Another quick trick is to turn the doomsaying thought into a funny cartoon voice in your head. It helps break the spell of the catastrophizing thought.
That immediately turns the powerful elephant into a slightly ridiculous figure, allowing the writer to regain control.
Precisely. You change the tone of the conversation with yourself from one of terror to one of skepticism and humor. We should be teaching students to ask, what is the evidence for this thought? Is this dichotomous thinking? Am I catastrophizing? Is there a less malevolent interpretation?
That systematic questioning is the core skill of resilience.
It is.
Finally, to resist the untruth of us versus them, how do we break down that powerful tribal barrier and rehumanize our ideological opponents?
We must actively promote intellectual humility and the principle of charity.
And what is that exactly?
The principle of charity is the requirement that when you encounter an argument you disagree with, you interpret the other person's words in their best, most reasonable, or most intelligent form, rather than the worst or most offensive way possible.
That's a radical departure from call-out culture, which incentivizes the most negative, reductive interpretation possible.
It reverses the engine of conflict. Instead of using emotional reasoning to assume malice, the principle of charity requires you to assume good faith or at least competence. This transforms a potential offense into an opportunity for constructive conversation.
And we also need to foster viewpoint diversity.
Yes, by reintroducing robust, structured disagreement formats like formal debate, where students are explicitly asked to argue against their own deeply held positions.
Arguing against your own position forces you to inhabit the intellectual shoes of the opponent.
It builds cognitive complexity and moral empathy. And for the institutions themselves, this requires a fundamental change in mission, a public commitment to defending free speech, even when it leads to offense.
That means adopting policies like the Chicago Statement on Free Expression.
Precisely. The Chicago Statement is a commitment to the principle that debate cannot be suppressed because the ideas are considered offensive, unwise, or wrong-headed. The institution's role is not to mediate subjective comfort. Its role is to protect the freedom of others to vigorously contest the ideas they oppose.
So the whole system is a self-reinforcing loop that needs to be broken at multiple points.
It is. Fragility fuels the demand for subjective safety. Emotional reasoning justifies extreme, disproportionate reactions to slights, and the US versus them mentality transforms ideological opponents into irredeemable aggressors, ensuring the pursuit of truth remains impossible.
If we can teach the next generation that their minds are anti-fragile, that their feelings are not facts, and that their opponents are complex human beings, not irredeemable enemies,
We stand a real chance of reversing these destructive trends and preparing them for the world. Adversity is not a curse. It is necessary data for growth.
And as a final thought, consider the radical wisdom of Chief Justice John Roberts in his commencement address to his son's middle school graduating class. He wished them, quite deliberately, misfortune.
He wished they would experience unfairness, betrayal, loneliness, and bad luck.
Why?
He wished these things upon them because only through those experiences could they truly learn the necessity and value of justice, the importance of loyalty, compassion, and the role of chance in shaping their lives. He was wishing them the necessary stress load to develop deep wisdom and anti-fragile strength.
The benefit comes from seeing the message in the misfortune.
That's the core idea.
If you'd prefer a shorter, visual breakdown of these ideas, check the description for the Mini Explainer companion video. And if you're watching the Mini Explainer first, you'll find a link back to this full deep dive for a deeper exploration.